America tried to shape China's future. The system had other plans. For more than a decade, Washington believed it had found a way to manage China's rise, not through war, not through direct confrontation, but through rules. If the United States could shape the global system, trade regulations, technology standards, financial access, and alliances, then China's future could be guided, constrained, and ultimately softened. Power in this vision was no longer about force. It was about architecture. For a time, this belief seemed reasonable. The global system itself had once been an American creation. The dollar, international institutions, supply chains, and technical standards all reflected U.S. preferences. China had risen within that system, and many in Washington assumed that what was built could also be adjusted. But systems do not behave the way strategies expect them to. The assumption behind the strategy: at the heart of America's approach was a simple assumption. If access to critical technologies and markets were restricted, outcomes would follow. Semiconductor export controls, investment screening, technology bans, and alliance coordination were not designed to collapse China overnight. They were meant to slow momentum, to buy time, to shape incentives. The logic was linear. Pressure would lead to friction. Friction would lead to reform or restraint. This was not unprecedented. During the Cold War, economic and technological containment worked precisely because the global system was fragmented. Supply chains were national. Capital was constrained. Innovation moved at a pace governments could track. But the world that emerged in the 21st century was fundamentally different. When pressure meets adaptation, instead of slowing China's trajectory, restrictions triggered something else: adaptation at scale. Supply chains rerouted, domestic capacity expanded, alternative markets deepened. New partnerships formed outside traditional Western frameworks. What Washington treated as levers of control became signals for reconfiguration. This was not defiance in the traditional sense. There were no dramatic announcements or ideological counterattacks. The response was quieter, more systemic. Firms adjusted incentives. Local governments redirected investment. Universities reoriented research priorities. Engineers solved problems that policy assumed would remain bottlenecks. In complex systems, pressure does not always produce compliance. Often, it produces evolution. The illusion of control through rules. Rules feel powerful because they are visible. Export lists, regulatory frameworks, legal prohibitions, they create the impression of order, of direction, of authority. But in a deeply interconnected global system, rules interact with incentives, and incentives move faster than policy. A semiconductor restriction does not eliminate demand for chips. A technology ban does not erase the need for computing power. A trade barrier does not stop capital from seeking returns. Instead, these forces search for new pathways. What the U.S. underestimated was not China's capacity. It was the system's flexibility, the role of the global middle. Another assumption quietly embedded in the strategy was alignment. Washington expected that partners and allies would reinforce pressure by narrowing China's access to markets, finance, and technology. In theory, collective action would amplify control. In practice, most countries chose something else: selective participation. They adopted some restrictions, ignored others, balanced economic interests carefully. This was not neutrality, it was optimization. For countries embedded in global supply chains, full decoupling carried costs. Growth, employment, and political stability often depended on continued engagement. The result was not a divided world, but a layered one, where compliance varied by sector, region, and incentive. The system absorbed pressure without collapsing. Technology, as a moving target technology, played a central role in America's vision of control. Advanced chips, AI, and manufacturing equipment became strategic choke points. But technology does not stand still. Innovation shifted geographically, design and manufacturing separated further, capabilities diffused. Unlike physical resources, knowledge adapts. It spreads through talent mobility, open research, and commercial necessity. Restrictions delayed certain advancements, but they also accelerated others. Attempts to freeze technological trajectories rarely succeed. They only reshape them. Why this was not failure, but miscalculation. It would be tempting to frame this story as success or failure, but that misses the deeper lesson. The strategy did not fail because it was irrational. It failed because it was built on an outdated understanding of power. In a world where systems are global, adaptive, and decentralized, control does not operate top-down. It emerges from interaction. The United States attempted to shape China's future by adjusting inputs, but outcomes were determined by a network far larger than any single actor. The system did not rebel, it simply responded. Power in a system that resists direction. This episode reveals something larger than US-China relations. It shows how power itself has changed. Influence today is less about issuing commands and more about shaping environments. Less about enforcement and more about incentives. Less about control and more about resilience. When policymakers act as if the system will obey, they expose its autonomy. The global order is no longer a machine with levers. It is an ecosystem with feedback loops. What comes next? The lesson is not that rules no longer matter. They do. But rules are signals, not guarantees. They influence behavior. They reshape priorities. They redirect flows. They do not dictate outcomes. As competition between the United States and China continues, strategies built on system awareness will outperform those built on assumption. Understanding adaptation may matter more than predicting compliance. The future will not be shaped by who writes the rules alone, but by how the system interprets them. Conclusion. America tried to shape China's future by reshaping the system. What followed was not collapse, confrontation, or capitulation. It was adjustment. The system had other plans, not because it favored one side, but because systems follow their own logic. In the modern world, power does not disappear when it meets resistance. It changes form.